I'm currently serving as CEO of a tech strategy consulting firm, Veracity Solutions, and essentially what we do is, and I've been in other positions throughout my career, executive positions, other companies, but what we do is really help senior technical leaders, right, executives essentially, implement, align with the business and implement and help the business go where it needs to go to become a strategic asset to the business. So many times I see IT, just being viewed as a cost center, really as kind of a liability to the organization. It's like the necessary evil. It's like, oh, I wish I didn't have to deal with this, but I have to. And the fact is they have to, because 70% of anything that happens anymore has to go through software, has to go through technology. So it's just not going away, but there's a lot of just change and transformation. We heard that this morning from Robert, we heard that from others, just a lot of revolution, if you will, happening. Okay, let me get my bearings on this clicker here. This really caused me to reflect. I did not know that this was the inaugural event, and so when I learned, when Ryan told me, hey, or when I heard that it was the first event, I was like, wow, it just kind of struck me. It was a little bit surprising because this is such a large metropolitan area, but it caused me to reflect, on a little bit of my own DevOps journey, and I thought maybe, so I went back and revised my deck a little bit, maybe a little bit of, history. For me, the thing that changed my life, okay, not just my professional life, I mean my life, this is what I've been doing for 10 years, was I happened to attend a conference and I heard Jez Humble speak, and he's the author, one of the authors of this book, Continuous Delivery. And he was talking about this concept, which I was like, what is going on here? What is he talking about? And we were dealing with, I happened to work at Ancestry.com at the time, and we were dealing with some issues. And so I went up to him after and I said, started asking him questions. And he said, look, I'll make you a deal. I'll give you a draft copy of this book. And if you can give me feedback, right, then we'll discuss. So he was looking for some. So I ended up reading that book. When I finally got it, I read that book in a day. I mean, I stayed up all night and read that book. That book changed. And it just opened, the horizon about what was possible. And it actually began to, that week I went back to work and started to apply some of these principles and say, we can do this. I remember I was telling Reggie, I went to the operations team at the time and said, I was so excited, I said, we can do multiple deploys a day. And at that time we were doing a meager deploy about every couple weeks. And I remember the operations people just looking at me saying, no, right? We don't want to go there. And I was really surprised, like, why wouldn't you want to do that? Why wouldn't, And they viewed deployments as just painful. And so when I said we were going to do multiple or 10 times a day or 20 times a day, they just saw their pain being multiplied by 10 and 20 times. And they just didn't want to go there. And so it was a real cultural shift, and took quite a bit of time. But then right after that, as I mentioned, I was able to attend the DevOpsDays in Mountain View, and just as an attendee. Again, very, very amazing. These, pioneers were there. First time I met Gene Kim, and some others, John Willis, those folks in the DevOps community. For me, 2012 and 2013 were these watershed years, because I actually was the first enterprise customer of Chef software. So when we said we want to do infrastructure as code, this was back in 2011, went to Chef and said, we'd like to do that, but I need the system on-prem. Cloud wasn't as popular as it was today. I need the system on-prem, and we don't have it. And I said, well, if you want to sell it to me, you got to get it on-prem. And so they did. And And the contract for that was about 50 pages, which I never really signed 50-page contracts. That's, so it was just a whole one-off thing. But through that, speaking at ChefConf, talking about infrastructure as code, all that, and then really kind of a highlight was with Gene Kim and with Jez Humble, we started a conference that was a precursor to the DevOps Enterprise Summit. Probably never heard of it, but it lasted a couple of years, and we called it FlowCon. And it was about how to flow value to the customer. And really, what Jez and Gene and everyone wanted was really this multidisciplinary. They were very adamant that we brought not just operations or dev people together, that we brought product managers, that we brought UX people, that we brought business people, right? And in fact, one of the assignments I had was they said, John, you need to go get your CEO, just this business person, we need them to speak at this conference so that we can show that everyone is involved in this movement. And so really kind of a big change. And FlowCon, we, if you will, killed it, or kind of said, okay, no more. We rolled it into the DevOps Enterprise Summit. So really cool. And then I served on the inaugural committee for DOES. At Ancestry was my first major transformation through Agile, adopting DevOps. At Ancestry, we went through from a couple of teams deploying every couple of weeks to literally 40 to 50 deployments a day. There was 4 to 5 deployments. At the time I left the company, there were 4 to 5 deployments happening about every hour. And that's just increased in the last 4 or 5 years. So, but there was a lot of things that I didn't do right. Even though it was great results, you look back and you're like, wow, I could have done a lot of things better. So I had a kind of a chance number 2, right? At this company, Advanced MD, did medical SaaS software. And so got to try some different things. And that was being head of data center and cloud operations. I was able to actually introduce things such as SRE, Site Reliability Engineering, and many more of these DevOps practices within the operations discipline that I didn't get to do quite as much while I was at Ancestry. And then was able to speak at both of these inaugural events at DevOps Seattle, DevOpsDays Seattle, and DevOpsDays Salt Lake City, where I live. I live in Salt Lake City. And so, when I look at this, I just look at this whole, what's happening, and I'm just really blessed and thankful to be a part of this. This is revolutionary. This changes businesses. This changes lives. It changes, I've seen so many good things come out of it, but people are still struggling. And now with Veracity, I actually have the opportunity to go into many companies and share what I've learned, and not just, particularly in one company. So it's a really exciting time. So with that, transformation. How many of you here are involved right now in a DevOps transformation? Okay. Probably, most of you, definitely. Probably should see all of you, because really in some way, we never are really done. We're always going through it. But, when we talk about transformation, we really are talking about this major change, right? This real big shift, okay? I mean, the classic definition, a transformation is a thorough or dramatic change in form or appearance, right? Behavior, etc. So we're, when we undergo these things, we know that these are big, changes within the organization, filled with angst and anxiety and all these things. And so, the challenge though is that we're undergoing these, but still, there's still a lot of challenges. Recently, when I was, interviewing for new positions, it was interesting that I came in and I thought my DevOps resume, to a lot of organizations, I thought, my DevOps background would be really appealing to a lot of these CEOs and senior leaders. And frankly, they're like, we tried to do that DevOps thing, or we kind of dabbled in it, but it didn't go so well. And so they kind of pulled back. But they really zeroed on some other experience I had, like cloud, that's hot. But the DevOps thing was really kind of it's still really, people are not so sure, right, what that is and what that means. And there hasn't been great, Gartner just reported, they know, right, that 75% through the next 3 to 4 years, 75% of DevOps transformations will not really fulfill the expectations of the business, okay? And we know it's good. I mean, there's research that says, this is the right thing to do. But we have a problem with actually making it, right? To actually show the value of it isn't really so easy. It's a transformation. It requires a lot of change. And so really what this comes down to is, in the world of the senior IT leader or executive, this is an execution issue. Okay? And let me explain. When you say, what's the value of an executive or an IT executive leader? Really, what's their job? They have a few things they really have to do. But in most organizations where technology, right, is so critical, and the CEO, we say, how do I get my CEO to understand? Guess what? It's the job of the senior technical leader, the CIO or the CTO, to actually explain that to the CEO. The CEO does have some responsibility to understand, but really he's saying to that senior leader, you're the one that I trust. You're the one that I've hired to make the technology organization provide value to this business. Just like I've hired the senior salespeople, right, the senior sales leader to bring in revenue, et cetera, et cetera. So they're really looking at that senior leader to show that value and to prove that value, okay? And so the senior leader has to align to the business. They have to understand what the business is trying to accomplish, okay? Align with that. They then have to manage the technical assets of the business. Within the business, just like there are other assets within the overall business, within the technology space, there are clear assets that leader must be responsible for and manage, particularly the whole enterprise architecture, the capabilities of the system, so that system can continue to provide value into the future. They have to manage the people, which are an asset. They have to manage the data within the company. They have to actually figure out how to unlock the power of the data and the value of the data to the business. And then lastly, with the product itself, they have to make sure that the product that's being produced by the business can actually meet the business needs. So these are the assets that the CEO and the rest of the executives are entrusting to that senior leader. Okay? And ultimately, right, they're saying, you have to execute on this. You have to make this happen. Okay? And you have to show how this creates value to our business. So, this is challenging, and we've all seen this probably, right? Lots of ideas, lots of things to do. I can guarantee you your CIO, CTO has way more things on his plate that people are asking him to do than there is capacity to do. Guarantee it, right? We all know that even from our own teams. Our own product managers are asking us to do way more than we even have ability to do. Same at the top, okay? So there's tons of ideas, right? The problem is that when you actually select the idea or say this is where we're going to go, you now have to make it happen. And making it happen is actually pretty tough, okay? So any kind of an idea that comes up is only as good as what you can make happen. And the same thing with a transformation. A transformation is only as good as what you can execute. Okay? If you can't fundamentally execute a transformation, it's now a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted money, and a lot of frustration, and probably a bunch of people's jobs. Okay? So, I want to talk. These are my principles of transformation, and what I'm going to show today is just a high-level framework that I've refined over the 2 or 3 times now that I've gone through this process of driving transformations and really wanting to increase the chance of success. You know, when my CEO says, okay, you've got to make this happen, that I can have a high probability that we can do it. You know, not just for me, not just for the business, but even for my whole organization. For the people that work in it, they're also counting on my ability to lead and to make this happen. Okay? So all the way around. So number one, the first thing I think that I realized was that within a transformation, there are what I call linear and non-linear changes. Okay? There are things that you can do within the normal context of work that you can actually adopt and change without really too much problem, okay? A good example of this would be changing how you actually check out code, you know, from a source control system, right? Doing more incremental checkouts versus a big branching strategy or something like that. You can actually adopt that within kind of normal work cycles, okay? But changing to multiple deployments, right, from a single deployment to multiple deployment, that's what I would call more of a non-linear change. That's a kind of a big jump in capability, okay? And so you've got to understand that there's 2 kinds of changes that will occur within a transformation. And both are required to actually move the transformation forward, but they can't be handled, right, in the same way. Second, transformational elements, even if well known, from the perspective of the business organization that's going through the transformation, is basically new to them, okay? How well known is DevOps now? Very well known. 10 years, tons of patterns, tons of things, okay? But for an organization that has never done it, it's going to be the first time. It's going to be completely new and completely uncertain, okay? So you can treat that very much like an innovation, okay? Something that is uncertain and new. And the process of transformation, thus, can be managed and executed as if you were doing innovation work, okay? So this is kind of the critical link I made, was right when you're doing a new DevOps transformation, because it's new and uncertain to that organization, you have to manage it within an innovation framework, okay? And there are, different innovation frameworks. Here's an example, right? Classic example of like linear and non-linear disruption, okay? The high jump, right? Going from a scissors jump to a Western roll, right? Within that, there's linear improvements, but the big leaps are made by actually changing the way the jump is performed, right? Going all the way from a hurdle type jump, a scissors jump, all the way to the totally non-intuitive Fosbury flop, right? The one where you jump and your head and back goes over first rather than your feet, okay? So this shows this principle of both linear and non-linear, right, to actually reach high-performing levels. A good example, this is kind of the fundamental base. If you want to take a look at a couple of books, The Other Side of Innovation and Beyond the Idea, which really talks about how to execute innovation, which is where I draw a lot of the inspiration for my framework from, okay? And the basic idea within this is that you have to realize that a business, what we'll call ongoing operations, okay? Where the business exists, it exists to actually serve customers that are paying money today, okay? And that's what we are actually in the business today to do, is to serve those customers today. That's what we call ongoing operations. When you try to do something new too far out of that, right, this innovation idea, you begin to run counter to what the business actually is optimized for, okay? The business is optimized for ongoing operation, okay? So there's this conflict. So which means is you can't do innovation or new work completely within the context of your ongoing operation, okay? So you have to realize that. The model says at a high level, right, and I'll just point these out, these are the ones that are critical. We have simple or small innovations, okay, that you can actually do within the context of the ongoing operations. And then you have to realize that, whoa, there are these nonlinear or big changes that we'll call customer complex, okay, that are high risk, right? They have high growth potential, but they're pretty disruptive, okay? And so what you want to do is understand those two, and as you come and you look at your performance engine, right? Here's the day-to-day operations performance engine. And you say, well, yeah, within that, I can actually absorb the small changes, okay? So great. What many companies try to do is actually take those complex and nonlinear disruptions, and they try to run it into the performance engine through existing structures, and those existing structures don't want to change. In fact, they don't even have the capacity to change because they're tasked with meeting the needs of today's customer, okay? Okay, so instead of doing that, you're like, no, okay? You actually, the recommendation is to create a temporary dedicated team, okay? When I learned this and I was actually able to execute this, my success rate more than doubled, okay? I was able to actually create new capabilities, right? New systems, and by employing this principle. When I stopped trying to shove everything through the existing system, that's when I was able to actually remove a lot of pain and a lot of suffering and increase the probability of success, okay? So here, just real quick, right? Typical things that you would do in a DevOps transformation, right? All sorts of different things, right? You would have your roadmap. Depending on the organization, I would take these things and say, what are customer complex things that this organization would have a tough time doing, adopting in existing organization? What things would be small? Separating those out, and then making sure that I, as a leader, was able to allocate and dedicate and justify resources for those dedicated teams. Now, these are not permanent dedicated teams. Unless I actually wanted to build a platform team, then I would actually staff for a permanent platform team, shared services type team. But typically it was, how can I make a temporary team over 3, 6, 9 months maybe to develop a capability, and then take that capability and merge it back into the performance engine, okay? So, very key thing, right? So Model S innovation, simple things, you just do it. You plan them out, but you push them through the existing organization, right? In your sprints and your scrums and all of that, right? Working with the product managers and those people to move those new changes, especially cultural changes, right? Through the organization. But the complex ones required this temporary dedicated team. And the key part is that you don't ever want that dedicated team to be isolated. Okay, we all know how there's another team over there and they're doing cool new stuff, and then pretty soon they become alienated and isolated, and there's this, again, another silo and a contention, right, and not invented here, okay? So there has to be through leadership and management, there has to be a partnership maintained so that when this team has accomplished its objective, it can be merged back, that capability and that team can be merged back into the organization, okay? Okay. Common execution errors, right? I failed to create a dedicated team. I'm going to really reduce my chances of success and lengthen the time it will take, okay? I can ask too much. I can break the performance engine by trying to run too big of things that are contrary to the existing mission of the performance engine or the core. Okay. I can create, if I'm trying to actually do something new, I need to create a dedicated team that actually has different capabilities than what exists currently. So I need to seed it with those mavericks, right? Those people that are on the cutting edge so that I can actually get that innovation to happen and then be able to pull that back in, okay? If I don't manage that relationship through effective leadership and communication, okay? That's a big problem, okay? This is all about leadership. This is all about effective management and leadership, right? So managers are good for something, if they, do it right, okay? Okay, here's my kind of final recommendations. This is one thing I learned. Try to execute all cultural and behavioral changes, right? These different ways of working, always try to execute those as small changes within the actual ongoing operation, okay? Dedicated teams are great for building new capabilities, but you're not going to change the culture within a dedicated team. The only way you're going to change culture is back in the core, and that takes small incremental changes over long periods of time, okay? So you want to do those kind of changes actually in the core engine. You want to be very deliberate and architect those changes, okay? Restrict type C, these complex big changes, right? New capabilities and technology, right? So new capabilities and technologies, right? Keep those to that complex and to those dedicated teams, okay? I like to create dedicated teams for new services, new platforms, especially shared services, right? That seems to work very, very well, right? The continuous delivery platform, especially because you can then scale. Many times we start and then we start small and then we have to grow. And the only way to do that a lot of times is through a shared service or a platform type team. And so using that, okay? And then the other thing is allow that capability to mature before scaling. Premature scaling can also be the death within a transformation. With that, thank you. If you have any questions, you can contact me here. I'm happy to answer, happy to give you what I've learned about this, but hopefully this was useful. You can take this back, talk to your managers, and maybe make it happen and be super successful at it. Thank you.